Okay, shalom, everyone. You can at any point just raise your hand, and I'll stop. I'm gonna kind of go through the study, but I'll stop at any time if you have a question or want to make a comment. But a few weeks back, we were going through Deuteronomy 23, and a couple verses stood out to me in the chapter. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 15 and 16. I'll read those two verses. And it says, "Thou shalt not deliver unto his master the servant which is escaped from his masters unto thee." Verse 16, "He shall dwell with thee, even among you, in that place which he shall choose in one of thy gates, where it liketh him best. Thou shalt not oppress him." So with that in mind, turn to Philemon, the Book of Philemon. And just so you kind of understand, when I was looking at it, I was really looking at the whole idea of how was this exercised, or where do we have examples of this exercise. So, as I looked at the Book of Philemon, I was reading through it prior to. It reminded me of these two particular verses. So I just wanted to kind of look at that, and we'll go through slowly and chime in at any time as we walk through this book. But Philemon is one of many, or one of a few books that are one chapter. If you look at John, 1 John 3, or 1st and 2nd, or 2nd and 3rd John, the book of Jude, they're all one chapter. But this particular epistle is different than any of the other epistles, because it's not written to a church. It's written to a person, and it's a personal letter to someone Shaul knew. And Philemon apparently is a man who hosts a church in his home in Colossae. So Paul is writing to him on behalf of a man named Onesimus, who was a slave, and his master was Philemon. Just going through a little intro history here. Onesimus, according to history, ran away and may have stole something from Philemon. And I don't know whether it was money or whether he owed him a debt of some kind, whether it was service, but it was something that he owed Philemon that Paul was writing on the behalf of. And if he would have met Paul in Rome, he would have been about 1,000 miles away from Colossae. So at some point, he was seeking refuge in Rome to escape for whatever he had done. So Paul writes this letter on behalf of him to kind of soften the blow, or get him to understand something, or get him to see something. But this is a direct contrast to the chapter verses we read in Deuteronomy 23. So if we look at the history of slavery, it would have been quite different in Rome than it would have been in for the Hebrews, because the Hebrew slaves most times were treated as employees, but in Rome they were treated harshly. So this direct command would have been something that would have been in direct account to Paul writing to Philemon and sending Onesimus back, because it says in Deuteronomy not to send them back. So he's looking at this whole thing and saying, okay, there's something here that you need to see, that you need to understand about Onesimus if I'm sending him back. Otherwise, Paul would be in violation of this command. And that's kind of what made me look at this book, was the idea that Paul may have violated this command that we read in Deuteronomy. So I'll start reading the chapter. Philemon, verse 1, it says, Paul, a prisoner of Yahushua the Messiah, and Timothy, our brother, unto Philemon, our dear beloved and fellow laborer, and to our beloved Apphia and Archippus, our fellow soldier, and to the assembly in thy house. So obviously, this letter would have been coming to Philemon, who had a church in his house, and this letter would have been read in front of the whole assembly for them to see. So I thought it was interesting that Paul, more than likely writing from prison in Rome when he wrote this, doesn't call himself a prisoner of Rome in verse 1. He says he's a prisoner of Yahushua the Messiah, right? And Timothy, our brother, unto Philemon, our dear beloved brother and fellow laborer. So he also looks at Philemon as a fellow brother. So they would have known each other. They probably worshiped together at some point. He would have been at their house, you know. And, you know, when I looked at the passage, I clearly saw that Paul is addressing this letter perfectly on behalf of Onesimus. Because he says in verse 3, he says, favor to you and peace from Yahuwah, our Father and Master Yahushua, the Messiah. I thank my Elohim, making mention of thee in my prayers always, hearing of thy love and faith, which thou hast toward the Master Yahushua, toward all his saints. So he's really just buttering him up before he speaks about Onesimus. So I just wanted to see if anyone had anything so far they wanted to add to the verses I read. Anyone want to read the next 5 verses?
Okay, start from verse 6. It says that the communication of your faith may become effectual by the acknowledging of every good thing which is in you in Yahushua the Messiah. For we have great joy and consolation in your love, because the bowels of the set apart ones are refreshed by you, brother. Wherefore, though I might be much bold in Hamashiach to enjoin you that which is convenient, yet for love's sake I rather beseech you, being such a one as Paul the aged, and now also a prisoner of Yahushua the Messiah, I beseech you for my son Onesimus, whom I have begotten in my bonds. This is the King James Version, so I don't know if it's more simplified in your Bible.
Onesimus.
Onesimus. What was it, Onesimus?
Yeah.
Onesimus, that sounds better.
You see anything there?
Yeah, I see him encouraging Philemon, letting him know that he recognizes the work that he's done and the assistance that he's given to other people. Where was it? Verse 7, where he says, for we have great joy and consolation in your love, because the bowels of the set apart ones are refreshed by you. Well, not necessarily physical things, but hearing of his faithfulness. Paul would usually refer to that as being refreshed when he would hear of the faith, the actions of the other believers, you know. So Philemon was he's confirming that Philemon was definitely a worker, you know, having good report, and his works was known among the people.
Yeah, and he, you pulled out verse 6 where it says that the communication of thy faith may become effectual by acknowledging of every good thing which is in you in Yahushua Messiah. So just understanding what he's saying that people are affected by your faith. You know, he's giving him a highest accolade. He's, and how we should look at this as we, if say we have, for instance, some criticism to give someone, the first thing we should do is tell them the good things they're doing, so that it's not all criticism. If I come home, good example, if I come home, my wife has been spending all day cleaning the house, cooking dinner, and I come in and there it is, a sock in the middle of the floor. You know what I mean? And my focus is on why is this sock on the floor? Not, babe, nice, oh, that smells fresh in here, dinner's ready. The first thing I see is the sock on the floor. And how Paul obviously has something he wants to say to Philemon, but the first thing he does is he praises him. He tells him the great things about himself because he's going somewhere. He's buttering him up here to get to the point of what the letter's for. And also in verse 7, he says, "For we have great joy and consolation in thy love, because thy bowels of the saints are refreshed by thee." So the innermost parts, he's saying, he's not talking about, gastrointestinal problems. He's talking about the innermost parts of someone are refreshed, are given rest, are given peace by you, by the things that you say, by the things that you do, and how we have to make sure that we tell people this, especially people in our fellowship. A brother call you and he's down about something. Nah, bro, let me tell you how you blessed me the other day. When you said thus and so, you changed my mind about something. You changed my heart. I was thinking one thing when I called you, but by the end of that phone call, my mind is somewhere else and headed towards purification, And I think sometimes us recognizing that in other people changes even their mindset, can change even their heart. So I think we should definitely keep that in mind as we read through this. Just to make practical application of what we're reading. What does it mean to us? How can we play this out? How can we live this out? So anybody else say anything? I'm gonna allow everyone to unmute themselves.
Yeah, I see that he's not buttering him up like without sincerely meaning what he's saying. Paul is sincerely recognizing Philemon, and I think that is a good point that you brought up. I myself was in certain situations or felt certain ways, and when somebody would call me, not necessarily to say what things I'm doing, but would call me and lift me up, saying, will refresh me in different ways, different statements, different comments. sometimes we get blinded by our own condemnation against ourselves, that we need our brothers and sisters to kind of remind us, hey, that's not the only thing. This is not the only situation that you're in. There's a lot of these, to remind us, to lift us out of that depressing state. You know what I mean? So I think that that's very important for people of Yah to recognize when a person needs to be lifted up and when a person needs to be encouraged, exhortation.
Yeah, also saw in what verse did you stop?
Stop at verse 10.
Verse 10. So in verse 8, he says, wherefore thou I might have much boldness in Messiah to command you what is fitting. Verse 9, he says, yet for love's sake, I'd rather beseech thee, being such as one as Paul the aged, and now also a prisoner of Yahushua Messiah. So, he's getting to the whole point of the letter here, but he's also telling them, I could have come and I could have commanded you with boldness, right? So in Matthew 20, chapter 25 through 27, it says, but Yahushua called them unto him and said, ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority unto them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever will be great among you, let him be your minister, and whoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. So, here the disciples there are asking him, who's going to be the greatest? And he's saying that there's not going to be any dominion, that you are to love one another, that you are to serve one another, that we serve each other, continually. 2 Corinthians chapter 1:24 says, not for that we have dominion over your faith, but are helpers of joy, for by faith we stand. We help each other in our faith, you know. Here he says, I could command you, but for love's sake, I'm begging you, because I want you to do this willingly. What I'm about to say, I want you to do it willingly rather than me command you to do it. If I'm telling you what is right, if I'm teaching you what is right, then you should do this willingly. There should be no question about what you are supposed to do. So that's what I kind of saw in verse 8 and 9. Anybody else?
I don't want to be like tag teaming, but verse 10, I think is in light of what you were saying, verse 10 where it says, I beseech you for my son. I was going to say Onesimus. Say it again. I'm sorry.
Onesimus.
Onesimus. My son Onesimus, who I have begotten in my bonds. There's this parental element to his relationship with Onesimus. Like he's in physical bonds, he's in prison, and he was able to communicate with Onesimus, the gospel. And he's saying that this is his son. He's connecting himself to the people who he's giving the gospel to. This is my son. I've begotten him to Hamashiach while he was in prison. It's like the idea that you're not only leading your people, you're also connecting yourselves. You're binding yourselves with another.
Right.
To endear them as a son is not, a light thing. And I think that even shows a little bit more of how brings us into discipleship also, a good idea of discipleship as well, knowing that we treat everyone as especially the young ones, as children. The older ones, I think Paul said that in a letter to Timothy, the older ones as older women as mothers, older men as fathers, younger men as children, and and brothers and sisters. So I think that family element is usually a lot of times not emphasized enough in leadership and discipleship. Yeah, I think that that family element should be emphasized in discipleship and fellowship, in assembly, and people come together. There should be a family element that binds us together. Um, yeah,
I
just
saw something else too, and when you read verse 10, it says, I beseech thee for my son Onesimus, who I have begotten in bonds. I'm getting a picture of this whole thing. So here Philemon has a church in his house, right? All of these people are there, obviously, to receive the letter that Paul sent. They're waiting with anticipation to hear from Paul, Shaul, right? So he's reading this letter. Obviously Onesimus has done something against Philemon, and he's reading these qualities about himself, how Paul is praising him, and rightfully so. And then he gets to Onesimus, which is the whole purpose of the letter. And I can just imagine him just being, stricken, with what's coming next. You know what I mean? Because this is read live, in front of everybody, I'm assuming. And I don't know what the actual offense was between them. It seems like it was money, because we're going to read later something. But he's telling him that now Onesimus is my brother. I've begotten him in change, which means he more than likely led him to Messiah. So this, to me, that just painted a whole picture of what might have been actually happening at that time. As he's reading this letter, he's excited. He's seeing these things that y'all was saying, and then he gets to Onesimus, and he's like, "Oh, you know what I mean? Here's Onesimus. Now he's going to ask me to do something here." But because he says, "I beg you for my son Onesimus," so I just noticed that as well. Anybody else? Ezzy, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. So a scripture that comes to mind from what we just read is Ezekiel 34. When there's this aspect of Shaul kind of building him up or fattening him up before he gives whatever lesson or teaching that he's about to give. In Ezekiel 34 verses 3-6, it says, you eat the fat and you put on the wool, you slaughter the fatlings, you do not feed the flock, you have not strengthened the weak, nor have you healed the sick, nor bound up the broken, nor brought back the straying, nor sought what was lost, but you have ruled them with might and harshness. And they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and they became food for all the beasts of the field when they were scattered. My sheep wandered through all the mountains and on every high hill, and my sheep were scattered over all the face of the earth, and no one was seeking or searching for them. Now, it may sound like a stretch, but in aspect, when you only, the word fat is H2459. It means the choicest or the best part, abundance. If you think of the slaughterings that they did to Yahusha, he would burn up all of it, the fat, everything. That was some of the best parts. And there's this aspect of even Yah himself, before he does a chastisement, there's always this edification or this fattening up. Even his word says that he'll add all of these things to you. But when we ourselves put on the wool and slaughter the fatlings and don't feed the flock, so to speak, there's this ego and there's this prideful spirit that sets in to where you're no longer giving the esteem of Yahuwah, sort of like how Moshe did after Yahuwah gave him the command, to strike the rock, and then to do it another time in front of the people for a given purpose. He's adding all this stuff, making himself fat instead of allowing Yah to do that. And I think Shaul understands how people receive, and before you give a chastisement or before you share whatever Yah is commanding you to share, I think it's important to bring out those fat parts, but to a certain extent, so that they don't get caught up in all of this praise and all of this and lose what you're trying to get them to focus on. But you also don't want to tear someone down either. So I think there has to be a balance. But everything that he's bringing out are things that even I think Yah would be pleased with, saying that, working in the knowledge of all good, which is in you towards Messiah. And in verse 7, for we have much joy and encouragement in your love, because the tender affections of your Kodeshem and have being refreshed by you. So obviously there's certain things that he's doing in Messiah that he's bringing out, versus bringing out other things that, might feed his ego a bit. So I just thought that was something interesting to point out, that he is making him fat to a certain extent.
Yeah, that absolutely is not a stretch. Here's why. Peter alludes to that in chapter 5, verses 1-3. He says, the elders which are among you I exhort, right? Who am also an elder and a witness to the sufferings of Messiah, and also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Here's the command: feed the flock of Yahuwah, which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but for ready of mind, neither as being masters over those entrusted in you, but being in samples to the flock. So absolutely, I agree, and I like that connection for sure. Anybody else, if you want to say anything, just unmute yourself.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a great breakdown, Ezzy. Very important to remember how we should deal with each other, teaching and learning also, that when you point out, like you said, the bad things someone's doing immediately, that automatically is going to give off a certain vibe and could turn that person off and away from hearing what you're just trying to critique, even though what you're critiquing them on. This way, he fed him with exactly what he needed to. So, okay, he got him feeling nice and good. But, hey, my brother, I want to make sure that you understand this real quick, And now he's been humbled instead of coming to a place of anger or feeling like he's being attacked. That without that first process going through, the next step, the transition he's making, that if he just started there, there's already conflict being brought up. Now somebody's going to be defensive, So I think that what you brought out was a very, very, very good point, and that should be definitely emphasized, to go through those steps whenever you're speaking to anybody about anything, when you're trying to correct them and give them that rebuking or criticism. You should always do it in a very smart way, to where they will keep their mind open to hearing what you have to say. And, Shaul did an excellent job right here in showing that example.
Okay, so I'm going to pick back up in verse 11, but I thought it was interesting too. In verse 10, he says, my son Onesimus, because in verse 11, and I'll read to 15, it says, which in time past to thee unprofitable, but now profitable to thee and to me. So apparently whatever Onesimus had done to Philemon was unprofitable. But Onesimus means profitable. His name means profitable. So that's a direct connection there. So he says, not only is he profitable to you, but he's also profitable to me. So he's really vouching for this man. Verse 12, whom I have sent again, thou therefore receive him. That is mine own bowels. Verse 13, whom I would have retained with me. Right? Thus the command, right? I would have retained him with me. Remember, it said, don't return the slave, but keep the slave with you. Let him dwell with you. Who I would have retained with me, that in thy stead he might have ministered unto me in the bonds of the evangel. Verse 14, but without thy mind would I do nothing, that thy benefit should not be as it were necessity, but willingly. So not a necessity, but willingly. I want you to do this willingly. I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to be compelled to do this. I want you to do this out of your heart. For perhaps, verse 15, he therefore departed for a season, that thou shouldest receive him forever. So clearly, this passage from 11 to 15 is speaking about forgiveness. You know what I mean? And it just makes me think about how hard is forgiveness for us? How hard is forgiveness for me? Do I forgive easily? If someone wrongs me, if someone says something to me, June will tell you, if me and her get into something, I'm carrying it for a little while. She has her way of pulling me out of it. And it's interesting, with her personality, it's almost like, at times, not all the time, because sometimes it's rightfully so. I have righteous anger. But the point I was trying to make is that she has a way of doing or saying something that actually makes me look foolish for carrying this with me, for carrying out the offense that I think that she did to me, and immediately leads me to, the point of, I got, I need to either let this go, forgive her. Was it that serious? Should I really be this mad? And, it awakens me to the reality of my situation. So, how hard is forgiveness for us? Do we easily forgive? Because this is obviously what he's calling him to do at this point, for this man Onesimus, who has wronged him in some kind of way. Anybody want to add to that?
I only want to say not so much because you're absolutely right. It's hard to forgive someone if you think you're right. I also think that sometimes, on the other hand, it's hard to to be forgiven, because the Lord Yahuah commands us to also that we are forgiven by Him. And I think sometimes when we do something, we like to carry that burden, and we don't want to be forgiven, or we don't accept it. And for some, I think we might even get into feeling a little bit of, being a martyr, that we are still guilty, and we hold on to that, and we keep bringing that up in our prayers. And he says that he puts our sins into a sea of forgetfulness, but I think we hold on to that, and we pray the same prayer over and over again: forgive me for something I did, 10, 15 years ago. And so I think it's just, on the other hand, we also struggle with that.
Absolutely. You can unmute yourself freely. All right, so in verse 15, I'm going to look at verse 15 and 16. He says, for perhaps he therefore departed for a season, that thou shouldest receive him forever. Verse 16, not now as a servant, but above a servant, a brother beloved, special to me, but how much more unto thee, both in the flesh and in the master. So anyone who would make the argument that by Shaul returning Onesimus to Philemon, his master, would be a violation of Torah, this shows that that would be the opposite, because he's not returning him as a slave, he's returning him as his brother. So I thought that was interesting. It's kind of what led me to even make the connection between the Deuteronomy verses and this book here. Go ahead, Jadiel.
That I think that's a great, as he, I think that's a great thing that you pulled out. It just stood out a lot to me. Whereas he's saying that this man is going to be profitable to you, and then he says profitable to me, but how much more profitable is he going to be to you? Then he gives the dynamic. He came to you. He was with you as a servant, and he wasn't profitable. So now I'm gonna send him back as a brother, and we're gonna see how much more profitable he is engaging as a brother than he was engaging as a slave or a servant. That dynamic kind of is it pretty much. I think as he talked about, mentioned this before, and I think Emeka mentioned this, and you mentioned this too, about the way that he was approaching Philemon. But now I see that the relationship that Paul is emphasizing on, saying, don't expect him to serve you under this premise. Expect him to serve you under the premise of him being your brother, him being connected to you, binded to you. Just like how he was profitable to Paul. And he didn't say that he was profitable to me because he was my servant. He said he was my son.
Right.
You see, so he's saying he's my son and he was profitable to me. Now he's your brother. He's going to be profitable to you. I think that's a good dynamic to encourage, that the mindset that we're serving our brothers and sisters, the mindset that we're serving each other, because we are closely knit together, and I think it produces more productivity towards whatever you guys are doing together when you're viewing it in a better light. I think that's very important. Verse 16, that really good stands out to me. But sorry, Sorry, I know you didn't finish reading the rest.
Yeah, no, June wanted to add something.
Okay.
Just 2 quick notes. It seems like he was asking him to do more than forgive him. It seemed like he was also wanting him to release him as a slave. That was a little more than forgiving. It's like, and receive him back, not as just a slave like he left, but now as a brother.
Absolutely.
And in the first part, as everyone else pointed out, it reminded me of Proverbs 15:1, where it says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stirs up anger." So it was almost, I believe he was being sincere in his words, but also using good strategy as well, so that he would be more open to receiving his words.
Good.
I also wanted to add something, like it says.
Okay. Milo
Can you hear me?
had her hand raised, but go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go, Milo. You can go.
I'm just mulling over the thoughts. I have a question, and correct me if I'm wrong, in regards to use, buttering him up prior hand, or giving him accolades or affirmation, or kind of coming gently before giving a maybe rebuke or trying to tell him something. What are the thoughts on when Peter rebukes Messiah about what he was saying about how he was going to die, and Messiah's response wasn't affirmation at that time, but he just straight rebuked him with, get behind me, Satan. Or when Nathan went to David after, he had sinned with Bathsheba, and he didn't come with a gentleness at the beginning. He came with a parable to go into rebuke. Or Samuel, when Saul was offering up, made offerings to Yahuah, and Samuel, and Saul's like, hold on, this isn't first, let me give my references, I'm sorry, 1 Samuel 15, 12-26. Part of it says, Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Shaul, and it was told Samuel, saying, Shaul came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a monument for himself, then turned and proceeded on down to Gilgal. Samuel came to Shaul, and Shaul said to him, Baruch are you of Yahuah, I have carried out the command of Yahuah. And Samuel's response is, what then is this bleating of sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? And then he goes on, he's about to rebuke him. So what are your thoughts in regard to, am I gathering that one is always to give praises before rebuke, or is it perhaps, you give praises to a brother or sister ahead of time, throughout their seasons and stuff, but when a rebuke is necessary without praise or acclamations, that is okay? Just trying to gather understanding here.
Yeah, I don't particularly think I don't think that it's necessary to always give accolades before rebuke. I don't necessarily look at this particular book as if Paul was rebuking him. I think it was more trying to get him to understand, as a brother in the faith, this is now how you have to view this man Onesimus that I'm sending back to you. And before saying so, he gave him some qualities that he had himself, being in the faith, as to understand, okay, now Onesimus is your brother. He's no longer your slave. Forgive him, but willingly, only if you see the conviction by what I'm telling you, who you ought to be, and then carry it out, rather than him rebuking him. Because I think it would have been, I don't think that if there was a harsh rebuke needed, there wouldn't necessarily be any soft words. I think when there's correction, sometimes we can soften the blow by, giving the person some, encouragement first. But when it comes to rebuke, when it comes to sin, as in the case with Nathan and David, David was ready to condemn the person in Nathan's story. And then until he turned the idea and said, well, the person is you. And forcing David to say, Father, later on in Psalms, against you only have I sinned. He understood that it was him that needed to repent. So I think those are two different situations. But when a harsh rebuke is needed, a harsh rebuke needs to be given, for sure. That's my take on it.
If I could point something out too, Paul always starts his letters off like this, so the tone that he sets in the beginning is also something that he does on the regular. So to say like this whole tone is him trying to butter up, Philemon, we can't exactly say that. It's just in verses, it's just really in verses 7 and 8, where it really seems like he's giving him, this, what you would say, I guess, is not buttering up, but just this, good, him sharing how he really feels like, even though, so he says, for we have great joy and consolation in your love, because the heart of the holy ones are refreshed by you, brother. Wherefore, though I might be much bold in Mashiach to enjoin you that which is convenient, yet for love's sake I rather beseech you, being such one as Paul's age, as Paul the aged, and now also a prisoner of Yahushua HaMashiach. So he transitioned into it pretty quick, but he always starts all his letters off with this tone of love coming in the name of the Messiah for his work.
Right.
But he does go into
I'm with you, Mecca. I think here though, when I say the word buttering up, I don't mean to suggest that there is this deceptive these deceptive words used to make a person feel good about himself. I'm saying that these are words that actually are part of this man's character, that he's called out for him to recognize. And the reason that he wants to recognize these particular character qualities is because these particular character qualities would be necessary to understand what he needs to do after he goes on with this letter. Because if he does anything contrary to it, then he may not be worthy of the accolades that were given to him. So there's a contrast for him to see. There are things for him to line up as he looks at whether or not I should forgive this brother or not. Based upon the things that Shaul was saying about me, based upon the things that Shaul was saying about Onesimus, what Onesimus is to him and what Onesimus had been to Shaul, he can then formulate his response. So when I said butter up, I probably shouldn't have used that word because it's not, buttering up is kind of a deceptive move to get somebody to do something. That's not what's happening here. So track that, forget I said it, basically he's giving him and saying things to him that he actually does. It's not a deceptive move to get him or to sway him any type of way. He wants him to recognize what a true brother is. And if he is a true brother, then what I'm about to tell you, I won't have to command you to do it. You will willingly do it because it's a part of your character. That's what he's saying.
Can I put my 2 cents in? Is that okay?
Say that again?
I said, can I put my 2 cents in?
Absolutely.
So, honestly, I just think a lot of times there's so much focus on how you deliver, and we stress out how do we deliver confrontation. And as a member of the body, I think we need to put on receiver. We need to be responsible and just not be so stinking defensive. And I think a lot of it, no matter how you deliver something, we're just very defensive constantly. It's like, just spit it out and tell me what the issue is.
Yeah, I think that sometimes
it's probably not popular, but that's what I see over and over again is, okay, two people get together, in my circles or what I've been in leadership and doing certain things in the team ministry, it's been, let's talk how, spending all these hours, how we're going to, present this information to these people or to the person involved or whatever. And it's just like, as a member, like I want people to correct me and I just better not be so stinking defensive. And so I think the receiver has
I think there's a difference. I think there's an element of defense, and then there's also an element of offense that has to be eliminated as well. When a person is defensive, is usually because they feel they're being attacked, and usually, sometimes people attack in order to relate their dislike in something. So there is two elements that also play a part. Defensiveness also plays a part. But you can't negate the fact that somebody can't just come at you. Somebody can't just come at your kids. Your husband won't let
Right. No, of course not.
Any other way, you can't really say, hey, just spit it out. And then somebody just spits it out any other way they want to spit it out.
No, I guess I was over.
So there is a method.
Maybe just because just now I messed up and I have my best friend who's always, it takes her an hour to preface, and I'm like, okay, I screwed up. Just get to it. It's okay.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot. I have seen a lot of preparation in how you deliver, the right people delivering the right message with too much fear on how it's going to be received. And of course you have to be careful, but that's just my point is we need to be ready to take.
Absolutely. Be ready to take, be ready to give properly, and be ready to receive it properly, and not wasting no time. I'm only doing this because I see Mike's hand up and he looks like he's getting this. So I'm going to keep on talking so he could get a little bit more frustrated.
Right.
Go ahead, Mike.
You can unmute yourself.
Now, I was gonna go back to the whole buttering up thing. I know what you're saying, Rod. We see the same thing in John's, visions and Revelation. The same way that the Spirit addresses the seven churches. It first, kind of admonishes them, and then it gets to what they're doing incorrect. So we see that not only with Paul, but even in visions. So
Right.
I would agree with that stance.
Absolutely.
I
All right.
wanted to
Yeah.
add, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Ezzy.
I was just gonna add a couple scriptures. Can you hear me?
Yep.
But I agree with what's been said so far. I think it, when there is a rebuke that is due, it should be done very directly. But I also think, the way that he is addressing this brother, it makes me think of the passage in Matthew when Yahushua, I think it's in Matthew, when Yahushua says, "Who is my brother or my mother, but those who do the work of my Father." And I know in this walk, prior to crossing over the Jordan, but prior to crossing over to this walk, I was, somewhat prideful or really overconfident. And I don't think I've lost that, but when I receive a compliment now, it's almost like I'm very bashful is the word, or meek or humble. It's almost like I don't feel deserving of that. I think, Yahuwah really, when you take on his commands, I think you have a constant reminder of where you've come from. So when someone is giving you compliments or saying, things like, "Oh, you dress nicely," or "I like your modesty," or, having a certain respect, not cussing in your midst, or things like that, just the little things that other people do or say, or compliments that you get. For me, it's a reminder of where I've come from, because it's like, wow, like the old me, So I think that there is a level of, when you admonish someone, especially your brother or your sister that's in this walk, it is breaking, it's breaking something or bringing them to a humble place, versus someone who is committing sin, who needs a chastisement or a correction. Right. That, I think that's a different spirit altogether. But the scriptures that I wanted to go to first, I wanted to read the Deuteronomy 23, 15, 16 again. It says, "You do not hand over to his master the slave who has escaped from his master to you. Let him dwell with you in your midst in the place which he chooses, within one of your gates, where it is pleasing to him. Do not oppress him." So the fact that Shaul is writing this letter, and in verse 14, he says, "But without your opinion, I wanted to do nothing, so that your good deed should not be by way of necessity, but voluntarily. For he departed for a while, possibly because of this, so that you might have him back forever." It sounds like it is the desire of the servant, Onesimus, to go back, because according to this, it says, "Let him dwell with you in your midst in the place which he chooses, within one of your gates, where it is pleasing to him. Do not oppress him." So I can see that as either him being oppressed, if he no longer wants to be a servant, or if he has something of profit to give, higher than the role that he's in, or a different role than what he's in of servitude, then it would be oppression, or it would be a hindrance of him reaching whatever it is that Yah has called him to do, if Philemon does not allow it to happen, or the master doesn't allow it to happen. Another verse that comes to mind is what you had already read, Brother Rod, in Matthew 20:25. It says, but Yahushua called them near and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles are masters over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them." So, I mean, this is just speculation, but if Philemon is a brother and Onesimus was not a prophet, maybe he was a Gentile, which is a pagan worshiper. Maybe he was not in the knowledge of Yahuwah. Maybe that's something that Shaul shared with him, because in verse 13 it says, whom I wanted to keep with me, that on your behalf he might serve me in my chains for the good news. And prior to that, he says he was of no use. He was of no profit. So, I mean, there's not a lot in this chapter. There's a lot of holes, so to speak. But if knowing where Shaul came from and how blunt he is when it comes to the commands and the laws of Yah and the testimony of Yahusha. I mean, he calls himself a prisoner of Yahushua HaMashiach. For him to say that someone is not a prophet, I would assume is someone who is not living accordingly. But now that he is in the good news or is a believer, you know, maybe he did something that would not make it seem so, and it would be hard for Philemon to accept that. But Yahuwah says that when you do a righteous judgment, you bring it to the person. If they don't believe you or don't want to accept it, then you grab a witness. To me, I see where Shaul is somewhat a witness that's coming in to show, hey, this person really, you know, feels this way or did this or whatever, to gain something, to gain a greater role. So that's just what I'm seeing.
Well, he, you know, in this particular case, Philemon did something or took something away from him, and we'll see that in the next two verses. Actually, these next two verses blew me away. I want to see if you guys see the same thing I see. Verse 17, he says, "If thou count me therefore a partner," this is Paul speaking to Onesimus, "then receive him." Verse 18, "If he hath wronged thee or oweth thee aught, put that on my account." That's the gospel, y'all. Did y'all see that? If he hath wronged thee, put that on my account. So Shaul is willing to, whatever debt Onesimus owes Philemon, no matter what the cost, put it on my account and receive him. That's the gospel. That's what Yahusha did for us. As we stand before the Father, he's telling the Father as he sees the sin, that sin is on my account. Father, receive him. Amen. We could stop right there if we wanted to.
Praise God. But
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. This reminds me of the scriptures, bearing one another's burden in the spirit of meekness. Galatians 6. Let me read it. I don't like paraphrasing. I'm gonna learn from Ezzy, pulling up those verses all the time.
June, you want to go while he looks for that? June has something to say while you look for that.
Yeah.
My comment was from a little while ago. Mike had mentioned the letters to Revelation, and this here is a letter to Philemon. I was just wondering, just keep in mind like the context that these are letters, and so like when you're writing to someone, you know, you probably would start like you wouldn't just die directly. Dear so boom, you know, like you're gonna say some stuff. Whereas in some of the other examples in the Bible, not that this is a rebuke, but it was a verbal situation in person. I just wanted to bring out that difference. Is nothing urgent.
Excellent point.
Affirming your wife.
That's right. I gotta live here. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Johnny.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have a verse in Galatians 6. Galatians 6, looking at verse 1 and 2, it says, "Brethren, if any man be overtaken in a fault, you which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the Torah of HaMashiach." I think this is one of those pivotal characteristics that need to be implemented in, you know, when you're trying to help somebody, or when you're trying to approach somebody who is in a fault, who is in a sin, who is in a wrongdoing, that you who are spiritual are supposed to, your focus is restoration. Your focus is bringing light. Your focus is lifting the person up from the ground and helping them to walk in Yahuwah's way again. And also considering yourself lest you be pulled down with the person. Because sometimes when we take too much upon ourselves that we should not even be taken, it brings you all the way down with the person. Now you're not doing the things you're supposed to do on top of this other person being caught in a fault. So this is one of the fruits of how you need to approach somebody. If you're approaching somebody and you're doing it the correct way, you shouldn't be brought low. In depression, you should be lifted up, with righteousness and confidence. In verse 2, the emphasis on bearing one another's burdens, it's kind of like this is the emphasis that Hamashiach had when he came. This is the emphasis he has now. So this is the mindset that we ought to have as well, to lifting each other's up and help, at least lightening the load for someone else rather than making it even more heavier.
Absolutely. But yes, the gospel, verse 17, verse 18. Let's read that again. If thou count me therefore a partner, verse 17, receive him as myself. Verse 18, if he hath wronged thee or oweth thee aught, put that on my account. Verse 19, I, Paul, have written it with mine own hand, I will repay it. Albeit, I do not say to thee how thou owest unto me, even thine own self. Besides, verse 20, yea, brother, let me have joy of thee in Yahuwah, refresh my tender affections in Yahuwah, having confidence in thy obedience, I wrote unto thee, knowing that thou wilt also do more than I say. So I have confidence that you will do exactly what I said, and even more so, and how this is compelling him to look at the actual aspect of love, tearing down the barriers of anything that he has in his heart against this man. He's counting on it. Verse 22, but withal prepare me also a lodging. So give me somewhere to sleep, because I'm on my way there. For I trust that through your prayers I shall be given unto you. So not only do I want you to do these things, but I'm on my way also. So it's funny because, if we look at it humanly, I'm coming to check to see if this happens also, is what I see there. Anybody see anything? We got a few more verses.
I have a question.
Sure.
Does he owe Shaul money?
He owes, Onesimus owes Philemon money.
Because in verse 19.
Oh, does Philemon owe Shaul?
Right.
Possibly, but it may not be money. It may be that Shaul led him to Messiah, and if you owe me for whatever, I don't know. It doesn't say specifically, but there's something there that he's alluding to that he owes him. Let's finish the chapter, and then we'll finish up the conversation. Verse 23. There salute thee, Epaphras, my fellow prisoner in Messiah Yahusha, Marcus, Aristarchus, Demas, Lucas, my fellow laborers. The favor of our Master Yahusha, Messiah, be with your spirit. So there's also all of these witnesses here with me while I'm writing it. So I think that there's also accountability there. There's a compelling to view love, compelling to be different. we're the set apart ones. We have to respond to things. We have to see things in a set apart way. We have to be completely different than the world. My responses to you, my brothers and sisters, should not be the same way some guy down the street that doesn't know Yahuwah would respond. There should be a difference. And I think there's a direct contrast that Shaul is trying to present to him here. And I think that we should also take that with us, in the realm of who we are, in the realm of how we live our lives. I mean, we read a lot of verses, we go through Torah, we read through the Brit, but how do we do it? And I think when we look at passages like this, it gives us an opportunity to look at ourselves, and to actually see how we are to do the things that Yahuwah calls us to do. So, anyone want to add anything else before we end the recording?
I thought Katora was trying to say something.
Unmute yourself.
I was going to comment on the Galatians 6 verse, where it says, bear one another's burdens in the spirit of meek. You didn't learn yet? In the spirit of meekness, lest you also be tempted. Jah brought out the aspect of sadness, but I was also thinking about the righteous indignation that was talked about earlier, because when we see our brothers and sisters down, it can make us upset, not upset at them, but upset at the situation. And when he says, take heed of yourself, lest you also be tempted, I was thinking about the anger that we would need to have self-control over in order to be able to properly help our brother or sister. I just wanted to bring out that different aspect besides getting depressed, but being angry and making ourselves, having more self-control and understanding the situation. Yeah. I'm sorry, just having self-control when dealing with each other.
It applies, absolutely. You had something else?
Just real quick, it kind of resonated with me how this is such a short, it's a one chapter book, but it made it in the canon. Like, so there's definitely the message here. And, I like the gospel analogy there in chapter 17. So there's something in here that Yah has definitely for us, for sure.
Anyone else?
I really like this breakdown. Usually, Philemon is one of those books that you like, let me hurry up and finish it. I'm almost up to Revelation, So I'm glad that we took the time to see the significance in the details, because literally I've never seen the significance until today. Usually, like I said, Philemon is like in an awkward place. I love Hebrews.
Yeah.
I love Titus, and it's right in between. I'm just like, let me hurry up, read Philemon so I can read Hebrews. But now I see so much, I see the purpose of why Yah would allow this book even more to be in the scriptures, so.
Absolutely. When I read through it, I was like, I have to, I have to share this with everyone. I have to, pull out these qualities, pull out these points, because it's vital to our lives. This is an everyday living for Yahuwah book. We can go to this in everything that we do, and I think it's properly and purposely put here. I think that, it's definitely often overlooked and ignored, because it's kind of, it's different. It's not like the other epistles. It's a specific and a personal epistle. So, but how it brings us to the bare base of our faith, You know what I mean? How it, you know, drops us to our knees even, you know, when we consider the things here. We consider, you know, the offenses that people have done against us, when we consider our disputes, you know, when we consider our family members that we just can't get over some things that they said to us or did to us, you know. This is the gospel, you know, and we should be able to look at every book in what we call the Tanakh and the Brit Hadashah and find the gospel in there. So, I mean, this book is one of those books for me.
I had just to add something else that I saw when he says, "But without your opinion, I wanted to do nothing." This is verse 14. So that your good deeds should not be by way of necessity, but voluntary. And then he says, "For he departed for a while, possibly because of this, so that you might have him back forever." That sounds to me like Messiah in Judgment Day, because, you know, Yahuwah knows our heart. We hear that over and over again. And, you know, you cannot in the last days be there. Well, my mom told me to do this. I say this to my son all the time. My mom told me to live this way. My mom told me to believe, because Yah is going to be like, I see you on a molecular level. I see the water within you. And it does not say Yod Hey Wah Hey. It's not written on your heart. And when it says, "For he departed for a while, possibly because of this," Yah not only to some extent, he left the Israelites to the kings and the mighty ones that they went after for a while, but his hand was still outstretched. Yahusha bore the sins of the people like a slave. A slave has the burden of his master. Yahuwah, master, carries the burden of his master. And Yahusha did that. You know, he not only carried the burden of Yahuwah, but he also carried the burden of our sins. And he has departed us for a while so that we can have him, the Ruach HaKodesh, forever, so that we can live forever. So yeah, the gospel is all through this. And then when it says in 17, "So if you regard me as your partner, receive him as you would receive me," I can see Yahusha and Yahuwah in that, because in Revelation, when I think he's speaking to John, and then John comes and bows down to him, he says, I'm a fellow servant. So he is, you know, our brother. But if we receive him, then we also receive Yahuwah, who is the master. So yeah, it was awesome. Thank you for that.
You know, it's interesting about what you mentioned, Ezzy, that you brought up that verse 14, where it says, "Without my mind would I do nothing, that your benefit should not be as it were of necessity, willingly." Like, remember, Paul was given this ministry.
Right.
Paul was ordained directly by Yah prophets coming up to him, taking the scales off his eye, you know, confirming him. He could have said, "This is what Yahuwah wants."
Yeah.
Take Onesimus, sorry. Take him in. This is Yahuwah's will. He could have did that, but he wanted Philemon to engage with him as a co-laborer, as a partner, as a brother, and to willingly respect what Paul was bringing to him. Because remember, the vouching that he's doing for Onesimus. Okay, Onesimus. I'm gonna practice that. The vouching that he's doing for Onesimus is not because he wants him to just obey what he's telling him he's about to do. Hey, I'm about to send him to you. Take him in. He's good. No, he's humbling himself and explaining so that way he can understand from his heart and is intellectually saying, okay, all right, so I trust Paul. I don't trust Onesimus. Paul is telling me that he's changed. And to trust him based off of Paul, I will trust Onesimus. You see what I'm saying? So he's giving them the opportunity to willingly submit to what Yahuwah is inspiring to happen right here. And I just think that's another element of excellent leadership, excellent discipleship, you know, learning, looking at your leader and your leader appealing to you and you recognizing why you trust this leader, so why you also would trust what he's saying as well. to willingly do something rather than, be told to do it.
Right. Amen. So that concludes our study on the book of Philemon. Shalom.